Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Over the past few weeks, we've covered a variety of different class tier sets over the past few expansions, but 11.2 is bringing a whole new take to class tier sets in a wild new way. These tier sets are going to offer so much more build crafting because they're not class specific or even spec specific. Instead, they change depending on the hero talents that you choose. So for Priest, we have a tier set that changes a little bit depending on your spec. Disc, Holy, and Shadow, whether you choose to play Void Weaver, Oracle, or the Archon, offering so much more build crafting than ever before, but also creating an opportunity for some unique builds to really rise thanks to these different bonuses. For today's video, I want to take a look at the Priest tier set bonuses since the patch is drawing very soon and we are right about done with all the different classes on this list. As Priests, however, are getting like a very swingy tier sets. Some are going to offer so much more complexity and build variety, while others are very one note and straightforward, but at the same time extremely powerful either way. As always, if you guys want to see more class updates and guides when it comes to patch 11.2 once it releases, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So first things first, we can take a look at are some of the visuals of the set itself. And this is the mythic version. Most presets that I've seen over the past few expansions usually have had some sort of a halo effect on their head. This one has more of like a face covering, but there is a slight halo with these almost horn-looking metal bits, as well as the crescent moon thing in the back, which is a nice bit of decoration. Shoulders have these void orbs, which have a change in intensity depending if they're like mythic or elite version or the base version. I like the little like movement, you know, dangling looking chandelier looking shoulder bits, as well as the bracelet with the spikes. But the rest of the set is like I think it's more of like a typical priest set, as I guess the best way to describe it. The recolors, however, add a little bit to this, but the right finder set is orange. It looks okay. Actually, it looks a little bit more holy in this lighting. Then we also have the blue and the yellow, which also looks more a little priesty. We have the heroic, which has this like fiery red, almost like Arathi look. And of course the mythic, which is the full-on void. Then we also have the gladiator version, which has this pink outline together with a lot of red, as well as the elite version, which has these red orbs instead of blue voidy orbs. So you have I guess a smattering of various different colorations that you could add towards the set in general. Now, that's just the visuals. The actual set bonuses are going to be a little bit more heavier leaning into the actual hero specs. In some cases, like the Void Weaver, it kind of takes over the priest builds a little bit. Void Weaver playstyle is primarily all about sending out a massive entropic rift. As a disc priest or shadow, certain abilities will help grow that rift, and usually the rift is part of this burst and has certain talents that synergize better with it. But the tier set itself kind of makes the rift and the void of the Void Weaver basically the priority playstyle for both Shadow and Disc. With the two set, Void Blast damage is increased by 30%. The Void Blast cast time is reduced by 20%, and Void Blast cooldown is reduced by 50%. So you're able to spam a bunch of Void Blasts during the Rift window. This becomes a lot more important with the 4 set, where Void Blast now also causes Entropic Rift to grow. Normally this is done through certain key spec-specific abilities, so for a Shadow Priest, for example, that is normally done with Devouring Plagues, so you have to line up a couple of plagues to dump into your rift to make it grow, but there's usually a limitation on just how big that rift can grow. However, now you have a second ability that can just be alternated between Devouring Plagues and spamming a bunch of Void Blasts to help grow that rift. Collapsing Void increases Entropic Rift's damage by an additional 10%, and the damage of an next Void Torrent is increased by up to 60% based on the size of Entropic Rift when it collapses. So there is quite a decent bit of a damage increase and quite an incentive to grow that rift as big as possible, because the next ability that would proc that rift being your Void Torrent ability, that is also going to gain more power for the next rift as well. But the playstyle essentially does become rift. It's all about the rift, baby. It's all about the rifts and try to make them as big as humanly possible. So you'll actually will see the size of a rift is going to be quite massive. And with this playstyle, you're trying to spam out your abilities as quickly as possible, void blasting as often as you can, as it becomes a very high priority. You get a massive big old rift grow in there, and a lot of your damage does end up being rift. Of course, Psychic Link is going to be, you end up cleaving multiple targets while Vampiric touches on them, but a huge portion of the damage ends up being big blasts that are smashing the target for millions of damage, and a massive rift that can just continue to grow and grow and grow. And a lot of the damage from the rift ends up being just that. This is where a huge portion of the damage comes from with the tier set, is being able to execute that rift combo successfully every single time. But when it comes to like looking at your overall breakdown for your damage done, you end up realizing the majority of your damage, at least as a Shadow Priest, ends up being Void Weaver. Everything that Void Weaver brings in, that becomes most of your damage. So the rest of your talent tree now has to accommodate, make it as big of rifts as possible. So and Shadow Priest has gone through a number of talent changes, so there may be some interesting capabilities here, especially when it comes to amplifying the effects of all of these abilities, like being able to directly influence the damage of your Void Torrent, and then the following Void Volley afterwards with Void Weaver, further amping it up by up to 60%, which can give you a significant burst window. But still, a lot of the damage of this playstyle is going to come from the Rift, the Void Blast, and anything that plays around the Rift ability. So Void Weaver, in a sense, kind of like devours everything the Shadow Priest is, and you become a Void Weaver Priest rather than a Shadow Priest to some extent. The Spectre Disc is also in a very similar situation, where a lot of your effects are going to be about the same. Penance damage is increased by 30%, as well as the Void Blast damage. Void Blast casting is reduced by 20%. Void Blast also causes the Rift to grow, and your next Mind Blast at the end of a Rift its damage is increased by up to 300% based on the size of Entropic Rift when it collapses. So you got very similar gameplay here when it comes to a Disc Priest as you would have with Shadow, but with a lot of the damage being from the Void Blast ability itself, which you can spam since it replaces your Smite pretty aggressively, especially inside of the PI haste window. And you can see how big that Rift could really get. A lot of your damage will come from getting a really big rift, and then having that Mind Blast be increased by up to 300% more damage. So it hits for a solid bit overall in general. But because of the fact that the Rift playstyle plays heavily around the ability of Mind Blast more than anything, you actually will get to use this Rift ability a lot more regularly and a lot more often as a Disc Priest. So you actually get quite a lot of value and quite a lot of uptime of the Rift as a damage and ability. So then the whole atonement healing that is part of the Priest playstyle, where you deal damage and you heal allies based on the damage you deal, that becomes even more important as part of this build in particular. Growing massive rifts, which you can do pretty regularly, and then it's mostly just becomes about the big rifts afterwards as well. So yeah, this becomes basically the Shadow Priest and Disc Priest essentially become Rift Priests. Everything that matters with this playstyle is just all about the rifts. That's literally what it comes down to. Rifts take over everything, and it's all about making them as big as humanly possible every single time consistently. It's kind of, I guess it's not really the most difficult tier set to play around with, at the very least. It is very straightforward, but it's kind of, I think it's the first case where we have a playstyle of a tier set that just kind of overtakes specs in this way. But with it being like a Void Weaver and being very Void heavy, at least I think thematically being able to overtake the playstyle completely and dictate how you're supposed to play it, it's all about the rifts, in some sense, thematically kind of makes sense, but will likely end up being for hopefully some fantastic atonement healing to damage conversions for this priest in the future. From there, we have the hero spec of Archon, which very similar to the Void Weaver. It is, at least at first, it feels very one note, because this one is all about big halos and trying to get the most amount of damage with every single halo that you use. However, there's a little bit more playability with Archon compared to the Void Weaver, where that one kind of consumes the playstyle. Archon opens up possibilities for certain playstyles to really open up to some degree. Now, the tier set is also going to further buff up the damage of that halo, but there's a bunch of different little elements that can play off of that halo with Archon. First of all, the tier set itself. The 2 said halos generate an additional 10 sanity over 5 seconds, so it's going to feed you quite a bit of resources. And resonant energy additionally increases the damage of your devouring plague by 5%. Resonant Energy is a debuff that the halos do every time they strike a target, causing them to take additional damage. And now with that tier set, not only do enemies take additional damage, there's also a nice bonus when now per stack they take additional Devouring Plague damage as well by 5% per stack. And Resonant Energy can stack up to 5 times, so you look at it at roughly 25% more damage from Devouring Plague, which is a solid bit of a gain when it comes to that single target damage that can also cleave because of the way the Shadow Priest is designed. Like even if you dump in a bunch of damage into a singular foe, because you have Psychic Link, as long as enemies have Vampiric Touch, that damage is also going to kind of like spread to other targets as well. There's also playability for Shadow Priest to go for Devouring Plagues and put them on multiple targets. That is also a playstyle viability here as well. It's going to be kind of hard to tell if that's what you're going to play into, like a multi-dab build, or just dumping a bunch of DPs into a single target, let it naturally cleave everything around you. But there's at least some burst opportunity there with halos. While Power Surge is active, which is the capstone of the Archon build, every 2 casts of Devouring Plague adds another halo to the effect at 100% effectiveness up to 2 times. Actually, I want to correct myself while I'm here. Power Surge is the main ability. It's basically what causes halos to create and then keep being created every few seconds over and over and over. So normally you would get a couple of different waves of halo, but with the 4 set, you're not able to add up to 2 additional halo casts within the Power Surge initial activation. So you basically are able to get more halos, which plays off of the 2 set to allow you to stack up the debuff, but also extend it for longer periods of time. However, those halos also do play around with the rest of your kit as a Shadow Priest, as Archon, while it is majority damage all about the halo damage, it does create some proc opportunity for other effects to also work as well, especially on the right hand side of the talent tree. Creating halos grants you a surge of insanity. So for Shadow Priest, that is an opportunity for you to deal a burst of damage with a Mind Flay Insanity. With Empowered Surges, it also further increases the damage done by Mind Flay Insanity by 60%, so you're able to deal a lot of burst damage very quickly. Also, Consuming Surge Insanity has a 100% chance to conjure a Shadowy Apparition. So now you can actually play heavy around the Shadow Apparitions playstyle, amp up those apparitions, and now you have some guaranteed apparitions that can be thrown in at the target. And these Shadow Apparitions can deal additional damage to targets of Devouring Plague. So if you're able to funnel a bunch of them into those DP targets, then you're able to generate quite a decent bit of burst altogether. So Archon now opens up a playstyle of dumping a bunch of DPs with a bunch of apparitions into a target while halos keep radiating over and over and over. So for them, there's a bit of this combo-based playstyle as part of this build in particular. And it's a very simple kind of a combo build more than anything, but it is fairly effective at the same time. While halos themselves can be further amplified with energy compression, where they do more damage and more healing, you can also go with talents such as Sustained Potency, where creating a halo extends the duration of Dark Ascension, or you can extend the duration of your Void Eruption if that's what you're going for instead, which gives you a little bit of flexibility and freedom as to how you end up playing the build. But Archon ends up being kind of like this combo playstyle, and the tier set further builds on that combo base builds without necessarily taking it over like Void Weaver does, but it just adds you a couple of new avenues of how you can synergize certain talents with a tier set with the playstyle in order to create a new combination. The other spec that can utilize Archon is Holy, and it has a very similar feel of like this combo type of a build when it comes to the tier set. It is roughly the same, however, it changes the mechanics that are amplified by the halos from your Devouring Plague to your Holy Word Serenity and Holy Word Sanctified, where halos reduce the cooldown of both those abilities by 5 seconds, and Resonant Energy additionally increases the healing of your Holy Words by 5%, so you can stack up to 25% since the buff can stack up to 5 times. While Power Surge is active, every 2 casts of Holy Word Serenity or Holy Word Sanctify adds another halo to the effect at 100% effectiveness up to 3 times. Those halos that you can send out do grant you a proc of Surge of Light, which normally just makes your flash heals a little bit more impactful. However, there are also a number of abilities that have been adjusted for Holy over the past few patches to make even those Surge of Light's flash heals a little bit potent. Like the actual flash heals can now help reduce the cast time of your heal or prayer of healing within 20 seconds by 30% while increasing its healing, and this effect can accumulate up to 4 charges. So this can allow you to use heals and primarily Serenities to do a lot of single target healing, or use Prayer of Healing as well as Holy Word Sanctify to do a lot of AoE healing. And they've improved the mana cost of Prayer of Healing because it is a little bit mana hungry with things like Prayer Circle, where Holy Word Sanctify will reduce the cast time and the cost of Prayer of Healing for 8 seconds. And if you're able to get a bunch of them back to back to back, since Halos help reduce the cooldown of your holy words, such as Sanctify, there's a bit of a combo where you can Sanctify, couple of Prayer of Healings, get some cooldown reduction, Sanctify again, more Prayer of Healings to do a lot of AoE healing. But also, Consuming Surge of Light reduces the cooldown of Holy Word Sanctify by 4 seconds, so even those flash heals that you're sending out further help reinforce the cooldown reduction on Sanctify, so you can use it more often, leading to more valuable Prayer of Healing that have a bit of a reduction in its cost. And when you pair things like your Apotheosis, which basically gives you even better cooldown reduction of those holy words, it allows you to spam a bunch of holy word sanctifies, at least in raid content, to do a ton of overall healing. As long as you're making sure to consume those flash heal procs whenever they are available, then you should be able to get a lot of value out of it in general. And you can see, you can just kind of spam holy word into a proc of flash heal, into yet another holy word afterwards, and then you'll have a buff of 5 stacks for resonant energy to do even more additional healing for a short bit of time, while still being able to pump out a bunch of overall healing. It creates this combo every minute, but I guess every 2 minutes with Apotheosis it could be even more effective, but it gives you this big burst of healing, and depending on the cooldown of your abilities, if you can manage that, then you could dump out a lot of overall AoE healing. But yeah, the Archon playstyle, whether it is for Shatter, whether it is for Holy, is kind of like a combo playstyle where the tier set is pretty good, but it kind of just helps build on the core that is Archon. So it's not quite consuming like Void Viewer was, but it does open up some avenues in some of the builds and playstyles, so it's at least kind of interesting in that regard. Then we have the Oracle, and Oracle Disc is a very popular combo, though it seems like they've been trying to tune Disc and Oracle a little bit to make sure it's not the only go-to within Season 3. The 2 set reads, your first bolt of each penance cast damages and heals for 200% more, so it does give you a little bit more value towards penances, which plays around nicely with the Premonition of Insight, which gives you some cooldown reduction to get a lot of penances back to back to back. It's not the craziest combo, but it's going to be fairly effective for how Atonement Healing works for Disc Priest within raid setting in particular. Where the set kind of gets interesting is on its 4 set. Casting Premonition of Piety or Premonition of Solos grants 2 stacks of Premonition of Insight at 100% effectiveness. Consuming the stack of Premonition of Insight increases your haste by 1% for 10 seconds, multiple applications may overlap. So what this does is, Premonition of Insight is a very, very strong premonition. For Disc Priest, this allows them to barrel a bunch of penances out, spread a bunch of shields and Mythic Plus, and the cooldown reduction in general just has a lot of flexibility in how you get to use it, whether in raid setting, whether in dungeon setting. So there's a lot of creativity and flexibility in how you use the Insight CDR. This gives you a couple of different combinations, like being able to combine together Piety and Solace in order to get also 4 stacks of Insight, giving you a lot of cooldown reduction, even a sizable window of being able to barrel out a bunch of penances within raid setting, usually penance into smites for the most amount of damage to healing conversion to atonement, or just a bunch of penances and shields within Mythic Plus setting in particular. And the cooldown reduction is fairly strong for Disc Priest just because you have so much creativity and flexibility on how you use it. You have shields, you have penances, you have smites, and between all those abilities and how they can synergize with one another, it can give you a lot of overall healing output or atonement type of damage, which then becomes healing for the rest of the crew within a larger raid setting. So the tier set itself is actually kind of interesting. I feel like the stack and haste buff isn't that great because at most you can maybe get like 3 stacks for 3% more haste, 4 stacks for 4% haste, or you can do 6 technically by going from Capstone into a proc of Premonition of Insight, but that's just a bit of a stretch. I don't really know if it's exactly if Priests are going to play around heavily in the haste window. The haste is going to be kind of nice, but it's like a very, very limited amount. If you got like 10% haste, I feel like that would be more noticeable, but getting like 4% haste, It's okay. It's not crazy. I guess at least haste is a fairly good stat for disc breeze in general. But yeah, I think the cooldown reduction is the biggest feature because of so much flexibility for disc breeze in particular. I don't really know if most players will notice like 3% or 4% gain in haste, unless you like play disc breeze and that's like the only spec you play, so you know it like the back of your hand. I really wish that buff was maybe something more impactful. Like maybe like if it was 10% haste, I feel like that would have been very noticeable. That does make an impact, but like 3%, 4%, it just seems like such a small number. Switching over to the spec of Holy, the tier set doesn't really change itself too much. It still is going to be heavily around cooldown reduction, though I feel like for Holy Priest, the amount of abilities you can really go for cooldown reduction are limited. Your 2 set is going to buff up the impact healing of Prayer of Mending. Not the bounce heals, but like the initial cast on a target, it's going to be a 1.6 million heal. So for what health pools of almost 14 million health, it's going to make a little bit of healing, but with such big health pools, that number does seem to kind of shrink over time. The 4 set itself is also going to give you the cooldown reduction, though like I mentioned just now, Holy Priests, unlike Disc Priests who have penances and shields and so many abilities for you to use your cooldown reduction on, Holy Priests are a little bit more one-note, where their best ability with that 2 set ends up being heavy investments into Prayer of Mending. Just because you can get a bunch of them barreled out super fast, super readily. And actually, a note, if you're in Borealis and you stand right about here, you can actually throw out your Prayer of Mendings at the train dummies. Normally, Prayer of Mending will try to bounce back to you, but if you're nowhere close, it'll bounce to other train dummies, and you can see kind of like the healing that it goes. It's really fun to stand in this spot specifically as a Holy Priest if you're ever trying to test out some Prayer of Mending healing on dummies. But yeah, the actual playstyle itself just gives you an opportunity to get a lot of cooldown reduction and double up things like Piety and Solace in order to get even more of this Prayer of Mendings on the rest of your raid or party. It can be nice because you can actually go for a number of talents in order to amp up the effectiveness of those Prayer of Mendings and even give you procs like Apotheosis through certain capstone choices. And of course, you also do get the haste buff every time you are able to consume the Premonition of Insight, so you can get a bit of a ramp up with it, which just like Disc Breeze is going to have limitations. At most, you can maybe get like, if you're really tryharding it, 6%. But these are the stacks that you will refresh each other, will overlap for a short bit, so you can ramp them up, but then it'll start clocking down. So unless you're playing into like very quick GCD, where you're able to get a bunch of spells out very quickly, and then get a cast or two while you have a 6 stacks overlap together, maybe there'll be some value, but it's really hard to tell. But like I said, it's a little bit more one note compared to Discipline, which has a little bit of playability with some of the different abilities that you can use your cooldown reduction on. But maybe if it's tuned correctly, maybe this would be a decent enough build for Priest when it comes to raid and maybe even dungeon content, as long as the numbers are behind it. But with that being said, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Also, join our Discord community, especially if you want to keep up with any last minute changes regarding patch 11.2 patch notes or class tuning. You can find the link to the Discord listed in every single video in the description section. Also, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in our next one.